Shabbat Shalom. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. This stanza from Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings describes so beautifully the inner thoughts of a little bird trapped and yearning to fly and breathe free. This week's Parshat has so much in it, but for whatever reason, these verses flew into my heart and took a seat, and we'll look at them together today. This is, if a bird's nest chances before you on the road, on any tree or on the ground, and it contains fledglings or eggs, if the mother is sitting upon the fledglings or upon the eggs, you shall not take the mother from the young. No, you shall send away the mother, and then you may take the young for yourself, in order that it should be good for you, and you should lengthen your days. Simple enough? Hardly. This mitzvah is known as Shiluach HaKein, sending of the nest, which is already strange enough verbiage. But before we go on, I want to note that this is only one of two acts in the Torah for which we are promised the reward that it should be good for you and lengthen your days. I'm sure some of you know the other one. It's kibud av ve'em. Honor your father and mother so that you will lengthen your days on this earth. What a strange mitzvah, no? The Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Brachot refers to this mitzvah as a chok, a divine decree for which no reason is given. Like some others in our Parsha, the not wearing together of wool and linen, known as shatnez, the slaughtering of the red heifer, and of course, perhaps the most famous chok, that of keeping kosher to begin with. But telling us that these are divine decrees with no reason, well, for a lot of us and for commentators throughout history, that's just bait for seeing what meaning we might be able to make of it. We yearn for meaning, especially with mitzvot like this one, which really stir up emotions and potentially terrible confusion and even great hurt. So what do we do with Shiluach HaKein, the sending away of the mother bird? We'll start with a little bit of Maimonides, but just half of the picture for a moment. Rambam suggested that the eggs over which the bird sits and the young that are in need of their mother are generally unfit for food. But when the mother is sent away, she does not see the taking of her young ones and thus will not feel any pain. In most cases, however, Rambam qualifies, this commandment will cause a person to leave the nest intact. Why? Because the eggs which he is allowed to take are, as a rule, unfit for food. So, a somewhat selfish interpretation. Nachmanides teaches that this mitzvah elucidates the trait of compassion, since we're saving the mother bird from witnessing us taking her young. Still, other midrashim suggest that this mitzvah teaches us about preservation of the species. Though we take the offspring, the mother, hopefully, is still free to lay new eggs. But I have always been disturbed by this mitzvah, and truly so are our commentators. They have spirited debates throughout the centuries as to what merit it is to send the mother bird away at all. Maimonides notes the pain of the animal. And he says in part 3, chapter 48 of his Guide to the Perplexed, as far as pain is concerned, there is no real distinction between the pain of humans and the pain of animals, because the love and compassion of the mother for her young is not reasoned intellectually and has only to do with emotions and instincts, which are found among animals no less than among human beings. Written 1,000 years ago. In our Ner Tamid community, we offered the option for our book club to read a book by Ta-Nehisi Coates called The Water Dancer, and our discussion of it is tomorrow. I do highly recommend it. It's a wonderful, if not perfect book, but what's perfect, and gives us a lot of grist for conversation. That's tomorrow morning, by the way, at 10 o'clock on Zoom. In it, Coates describes a scene in the antebellum South, characters that live on a plantation called Lockless, and how one of the characters becomes involved with the Underground Railroad. I don't want to spoil too much. It really is a fine read. But in the book, and Coates is unsparing in his criticism of American history and the abomination of slavery with which we still reckon. But I will admit that I was surprised that he depicted the slaves at the plantation of Lockless as actually possessing a spirit of nostalgia for earlier days on the plantation, when the plantation's fortunes were booming, when tobacco was king, and most importantly, Coates describes, when the families were still together, when uncles and aunts and cousins and grandparents, though enslaved, did what he calls their task, with a capital T, as family units. That really surprised me, that he allowed for that sense of reminiscence, that sense of nostalgia that perhaps is just human nature to remember the good old days. But he actually depicts an almost, and I say this with full qualification, an almost bearable reality when the families were tasking together. When it all goes completely to pieces is when the slaves, one by one, are sold off down Natchez Way to further into the Deep South, that specter that hangs over all of them of being torn from the family members who made life livable. This mitzvah, and perhaps because Ta-Nehisi's book is so much on my mind, makes me cry, because here is a family of birds torn apart, never to be whole again. And our sages acknowledge that the concession to eating meat is that of a concession, an adjustment for human nature, because actually human nature, suggests this mitzvah, is perhaps to take the mother and the baby chicks all together. How we navigate this incredibly rocky and painful terrain of whether or not we keep families together, and the pain we inflict on families when we tear them apart, that's something with which we need to reckon. And of course, you all know me well enough by now that here we sit in almost September of 2020, and according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, a rather reputable bunch, there is still family separation going on at our United States border, made even worse by the COVID-19 catastrophe that has been visited upon our earth and made unnecessarily worse here in our own country. The fact that we are still, as a country, separating families is to our shame. We need to learn about it, to speak out about it, and to stop it. This mitzvah of sending away the mother bird is actually linked to helping bring the Messiah. Why? Well, there are a number of thoughts about it. The mitzvah is considered to perhaps depict Rachmanus, compassion. But Rabbi Shlomo Riskin teaches that, of course, the true act of compassion would be if we were forbidden to disturb the nest at all. When one is able to apply compassion to a mother bird, it can lead to greater concern for people. And one aspect of this, he teaches, perhaps will be the freeing of slaves. As Maimonides indicates, the Torah mandates that we should not cause grief to cattle or to birds, so how much more careful must we be that we do not cause grief to fellow human beings? The increased compassion for all of God's creatures ought to lead to greater appreciation of the Creator, and hence a greater commitment to performing all of God's mitzvot, and so finally to that ideal time of justice, compassion, and harmony that represents the Messianic vision. Speaking of representing Messianic visions, we came across a beautiful painting by Yoram Ra'anan, where he embodies in his gorgeous colors the Zoharic, the mystical interpretation of this mitzvah. The writers of the Zohar, our great mystics, our Kabbalists, imagined that this mitzvah suggests that there is an angel for all creatures, including an angel that oversees this hypothetical nest where the mother is being separated from her babies. And the Zohar imagines that the angel is crying, weeping to God for the exile of the mother bird. So suggesting the opposite of compassion represented in this mitzvah. Ra'anan paints a door symbolizing the release to freedom, where the purple mother bird is set free, flying up to the wine-covered sky and greeted by hovering shapes of white birds. On the bottom of the painting is a large nest with golden hues and filled with golden eggs, suggesting, in one interpretation, the rich treasury of Jewish tradition. And the nest itself, if you look and step back actually, is shaped like a great bird, referring to the idea that the ultimate mother bird, the people of Israel, is in exile, and that we cry for that, the way the angel cried for the one mother bird. Perhaps the fulfillment of this commandment, actually to even take a step back and go a step further and not disturb the nest at all, that enables the soul of the Jewish people to fly to a higher plane, maybe reaching the throne of glory and evoking compassion on all of creation. Now, my father would have said in response to this sermon, "Honey, I'm sorry to tell you, but that one was for the birds." And he would have been right. This one is for the birds, for their families and for ours. And I leave you with these words of Maya Angelou, describing the free bird. The free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips her wings in the orange sun's rays, and dares to claim the sky. Shabbat Shalom.